It's funny, isn't it? We're just constantly seeing these promises, you know? Instant mastery, the ultimate shortcut, this foolproof system for absolutely everything.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
And in learning and development, our world, that pressure just feels amplified, like way higher. We're all digging for those best practices, those silver bullets that guarantee results.
The certainty trap.
Exactly. But, you know, lately I've been thinking quite a bit about something this really ancient thinker, a skeptic named Agrippa, pointed out ages ago.
Oh, Agrippa. Yeah, his ideas about knowledge, they feel surprisingly relevant, especially when you look at how much stock we put in finding absolute certainty and what we know, how we learn, how we teach, particularly today.
Absolutely. He came up with this thing called the trilemma. It's basically this three-pronged challenge to how we justify anything we claim to know.
Right.
And when you take that lens, that trilemma, and you apply it to L&D, maybe specifically looking at some things we've observed in our own team's efforts, well, it throws up some really fascinating questions about the very foundations we're building on.
It really does. At its core, Agrippa's trilemma, it kind of shows us that anytime we try to prove something, justify some piece of knowledge, we inevitably hit one of three roadblocks, fundamental problems.
Okay, lay it on us. What are these three tricky spots?
So the first one is what philosophers call infinite regress. Picture this. Why are we pushing so hard to get, say, our sales team trained on that new CRM software?
Yeah.
Well, the answer might be because it'll help them manage leads better. Fine. But then you ask, okay, why is managing leads better important?
Right, because it boosts sales.
Exactly. And why do we need to boost sales?
Yeah.
And you keep asking why, and you find yourself on this staircase that just goes down forever. You never actually hit a solid bottom floor, a truly foundational answer.
Right. It's like that endless why game kids play. It just keeps going deeper and deeper, but you never hit bedrock. And I definitely see that at our work. We say, we need this platform for engagement. Okay, why engagement, productivity, why productivity, profits, and on and on.
Just an endless chain.
So maybe, yeah, instead of that endless chase, we need to be clear about, like, the practical horizon. Where does the why need to stop for this particular goal?
That's a really good way to put it. The second part of the trilemma is circular reasoning. This is where your justification for believing X, well, it actually ends up depending on X being true in the first place.
Chasing your own tail, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. Chasing your tail.
Can you give us an L&D example of that?
Sure. Think about leadership development.
Yeah.
We often prioritize it, right? Because effective leaders, they create better team performance.
Makes sense.
But then if you ask why better team performance matters, a common answer is that, well, it requires strong leadership to actually guide those teams effectively.
Ah, okay.
See, it's a closed loop. The reason for doing it circles right back to the thing you started with. Good leaders make good teams need good leaders.
I see. So how often are our learning goals just, like, restating the problem we wanted to solve anyway?
That's the question it raises, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like saying, this course is valuable because it teaches really valuable skills. Sounds plausible, right? But dig just a tiny bit and you realize you haven't actually given an independent reason for why it's valuable.
Exactly right. And that leads us straight into the third part, the foundational assumption, or, the axiom. This is simply where we stop. We stop asking why. Yeah. We just accept something is true, no more proof needed. It's the just because point.
These are the ones we hear all the time internally, I bet. Well, that's just how we've always done it, or it's industry best practice. We must have tons of those baked into how we approach learning.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about common statements like personalized learning is always better, or gamification definitely boosts retention. Now, these things might often be helpful, maybe even mostly true in many cases.
Right.
But if you try to rigorously, logically prove them from absolute scratch for every single context, every time, you'll probably hit a wall where you just have to say, well, we just accept that.
Yeah.
Or maybe, as a group, you might have said, that's just the current wisdom. And if we can't prove them definitively, then you have to ask, what are the real beliefs driving these ideas? And are those beliefs always the right ones for our specific situation?
It is. Yeah, it's a bit unsettling when you really sit with it. We pour resources into these big training programs, invest heavily in certain technologies, maybe shape our whole learning culture around assumptions that, well, that might not have that rock-solid logical footing we thought they did.
Exactly.
I remember this big push we did based on the idea that microlearning, shorter modules were always better. It felt right, seemed efficient.
Intuitively appealing.
Totally. But when we actually tried to measure the impact later, It wasn't nearly as clear-cut as we'd assumed for every situation.
And that kind of vulnerability, it gets magnified by the modern business world's, let's face it, obsession with metrics, guarantees, certainty.
Oh, yeah. Dashboards, ROI, predictive analytics.
We want it all mapped out. We want learning to give us this clear, quantifiable picture. Tell us what happened, tell us what will happen. But the truth is, human learning, it's complex, it's often messy, it doesn't always fit neatly on a chart. Growth isn't linear.
It's like we're trying to jam this really organic, very human thing into a super rigid data-only box. And Agrippa's trilemma is basically saying, hey, careful, the boxes themselves, they're built on assumptions you can't actually prove beyond doubt.
Precisely. So, yeah, Agrippa isn't saying learning is useless or our efforts don't matter. Not at all. He's just pointing out this fundamental uncertainty that sits underneath all our attempts to know things and prove things.
Okay, so the goal isn't chasing this illusion of absolute certainty in our L&D strategy.
Exactly. It's more about acknowledging that uncertainty is just there. It's inherent. And then adapting how we think and what we do because of it. So instead of trying to build these perfect, logically airtight pyramids of knowledge, maybe we'd be better off cultivating, I don't know, let's call them gardens of uncertainty.
Gardens of uncertainty. I like that. That really shifts the perspective, doesn't it? So if we're gardening instead of building pyramids, what does that actually look like in the day-to-day of L&D?
Well, think about an ant colony. It's a classic example. There's no CEO ant, right? No master blueprint telling every single ant what to do.
Right. No central planning committee.
None. Yet the colony as a whole, incredibly sophisticated. It adapts, it's resilient, it learns, it evolves through millions of tiny decentralized interactions, responding to what's right there in the environment.
Okay, so does that mean just abandon all structure, just let learning happen?
Not quite. Not necessarily abandon structure altogether, but it suggests a different emphasis. Less top-down, perfectly architected programs.
And more about creating the right conditions, where learning can kind of bubble up more naturally, adaptively.
Precisely. And this means making a few key shifts in how we approach things. First one, moving from focusing mainly on curriculum, what we push out, to actively fostering curiosity, what pulls people in. So instead of just telling people, here's what we decided you need to know, we need to equip them better, give them the skills, and maybe more importantly, the mindset to explore and figure out what they don't know yet.
Yeah, that really resonates. It feels less like filling a bucket and more like lighting a fire inside someone. So practically, how do we fuel that curiosity? What does that look like?
It means explicitly teaching people how to learn more effectively. So things like metacognition, thinking about your own thinking and learning processes.
Right, self-awareness as a learner.
Exactly. Developing stronger critical thinking skills, helping people build better mental models so they can make sense of complex stuff. It's really about empowering individuals to be more autonomous, more effective learners on their own.
It makes sense. And you mentioned a second shift.
Yeah, the second one is moving away from a purely expert-led model, the sage on the stage idea, towards one that really values inquiry and building understanding together, collectively.
Okay, because the traditional way assumes knowledge lives with the experts and just needs transmitting, right?
Pretty much. And as Agrippa points out, even that expertise rests on its own set of assumptions somewhere down the line.
So how do we, I guess, democratize learning a bit more, make it less top-down?
By actively nurturing learning communities, places where people can learn from each other, build knowledge together, and feel safe questioning assumptions, even the experts' assumptions. Sometimes. Think about setting up maybe informal learning guilds around specific hot topics or skills, or facilitating more cohort discussions around tricky, real-world challenges people are facing now. It changes the dynamic from one person broadcasting knowledge to a group exploring ideas together.
Interesting. So peer learning, collective intelligence, that becomes much more central.
Got it.
And the third shift?
The third big shift is moving away from relying so heavily on standardized one-size-fits-all programs towards building more flexible, more evolving learning ecosystems.
Right, because the old model assumes everyone needs the same stuff, same way, same time.
Yeah, and in today's world, things change so fast. Those rigid systems, they can get outdated almost before they're fully rolled out.
Oh, I can think of examples of that from our own experience. We invested ages in standardizing this one program, and by the time everyone had gone through it, the challenges it addressed had already shifted quite a bit.
Exactly. That's the risk.
So what does this ecosystem look like instead? What's different?
It's more about creating modular learning paths. things people can opt into, pathways they can tailor more to their own specific needs, their team's needs, the immediate problems they're trying to solve.
Okay.
So instead of one fixed linear track, you have this more dynamic environment. Resources get updated, things evolve based on what the organization actually needs right now and what learners are asking for.
So it sounds like we're moving away from learning as this discrete thing, an event, a course, a finished product, and more towards seeing it as just a continuous adaptive process, questioning, exploring, changing.
Precisely. Agrippa's trilemma, it forces us to face the limits of our logical proofs in learning. But by acknowledging that uncertainty, we actually open the door to approaches that are more agile, more resilient, and probably ultimately more impactful.
Cultivating that ongoing inquiry, not just building a system based on supposedly final answers.
Yes, that's the heart of it.
Okay, this idea of embracing uncertainty, cultivating these gardens, it's powerful. But it leads straight to the practical question, doesn't it? How on earth do we actually design and run effective L&D strategies if we admit we don't have all the answers, if we can't build on perfectly proven ground?
Right, and that's where this concept we've been discussing internally about being intentionally minimalist really comes into play.
Minimalist L&D. Tell me more.
Well, we have to consciously fight that urge, that corporate reflex to just add more content, more platform features, more badges, more dashboards.
The law of excess, maybe.
I like that. The law of excess. It often just leads to overload, right? Irrelevance, disengagement. Agrippa might have called it stacking bricks on a cloud. Looks busy, feels productive, but the foundation's, well, cloudy.
That's a fantastic image, stacking bricks on a cloud.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the bones of this minimalist approach then, especially looking through that trilemma lens?
A minimalist L&D strategy, one that takes a trilemma seriously, it's really focused on being adaptable and deeply human-centered. It kind of rests on three key ideas as we see it.
Yeah.
First, anchor everything to a clear guiding principle. Even if you accept uncertainty, your strategy still needs some foundational belief, something that gives direction, focus, even if you can't prove it with pure logic from first principles.
So you accept the axiom, but you're conscious about which axiom you're choosing.
Exactly. You choose your foundational assumption deliberately. For instance, within our team, a principle we often return to is something like empower the individual and the ecosystem transforms.
Right.
Now, we don't claim that's, Newton's law of learning. It's not scientifically proven in that sense. But it reflects our core values. What we believe leads to the best outcomes, and it helps us decide where to put our energy. It's our chosen starting point, our compass.
Got it. So step one is identify and commit to that core belief that really drives your L&D philosophy for your specific context.
Yes, find your compass. Second key part of this minimalist strategy, design learning experiences that are built for questions, not just for delivering answers.
So instead of being scared of the infinite regress, we lean into it.
We kind of welcome it, yeah.
Yeah.
We create opportunities that actually encourage and leverage that spirit of why and what if.
How would we do that, practically?
Think about shifting the balance. Less passive content consumption, more active grappling with problems. Maybe replace some long presentations with, say, scenario-based challenges where people have to figure things out, use critical thinking. Maybe create specific forums, question clubs even, where people can safely explore tricky industry trends, ethical gray areas, new tech they don't understand yet, use simulations where there isn't one right answer, but lots of potential paths and consequences to reflect on.
So the focus shifts to building the skill of navigating ambiguity, learning through inquiry itself.
Exactly. We're deliberately fostering that chain of why, but framing it as exploration, not as a flaw in our knowledge.
Okay, that makes sense. And the third element?
The third crucial piece is designing learning in small, scalable units. This helps break that circular logic we talked about earlier, where learning just means delivering content, which means we need more learning.
Right, the content treadmill.
Yeah, we disrupt that loop by focusing instead on the microcycle of experience something, reflect on it, get feedback, try again.
Smaller units, what does that look like? Like ditching workshops?
Not necessarily ditching them entirely, but maybe relying less solely on, say, hour-long e-learning modules or multi-day boot camps. Thinking more about incorporating shorter, perhaps more frequent learning nudges.
Learning nudges.
Could be lots of things. Maybe a focused 30-minute session on just one key idea, followed immediately by a suggested practical activity to try it out, and then a quick way to reflect, individually or as a team.
So shorter bursts.
Yeah, or even simpler. A quick internal podcast discussing a new trend, like this deep dive. A provocative question posed in a team meeting that sparks discussion. A brief peer coaching session. Sometimes those smaller, focused hits can have more lasting impact than just drowning people in dense content.
Okay, so it's shifting from delivering the curriculum to facilitating this ongoing flow of learning and adapting, using these smaller, targeted nudges and experiences.
Exactly. That's the idea. This minimalist approach, informed by Agrippa, it's really about getting more impact by focusing on what truly matters. Sparking curiosity, encouraging good questions, and promoting that constant cycle of reflection and adaptation.
This really does reframe the role of the L&D professional, doesn't it? It's less about being the master architect, designing this perfect, finished knowledge building.
And much more about being, yeah, like we said, a thoughtful gardener.
A gardener. Someone who cultivates the soil, creates the right conditions for growth, sees uncertainty not as a threat, but maybe as, I don't know, fertilizer for innovation.
And understands that saying we don't actually have all the answers here isn't failure. It can be the first step toward finding better answers together.
So the main goal shifts. It's not about us having all the knowledge, but about fostering a really strong culture of inquiry across the organization.
Yes, a culture where people feel safe, even encouraged to ask the hard questions, to challenge the status quo assumptions, and to just keep learning and adapting, together.
Exactly. We need to be asking ourselves constantly as L&D teams and individuals, what are we just assuming here in our strategies? Why do we assume that? Where are we maybe stuck in a loop justifying something with itself? And what are those core beliefs, those axioms that are really driving what we do?
And acknowledging those limits, just like Agrippa did centuries ago, it doesn't paralyze us. It actually allows us to move forward with, well, maybe more humility, more agility, and hopefully get better learning results in the end.
It feels like admitting we're navigating Darwin's jungle, maybe, rather than Newton's predictable clockwork universe.
That's a great way to put it, the jungle, not the clock. So yeah, the enduring lesson from Agrippa for us in L&D, it's not despair over proving things, it's really this powerful invitation. Be more critical, be more aware of our assumptions, and actually embrace uncertainty. See it as the very environment where real, meaningful, adaptive learning actually happens.
It's a huge shift, really, from chasing that ghost of certainty to actively nurturing resilient, ongoing curiosity. That feels like a much healthier, more sustainable path. And probably way more effective for building learning cultures that can actually keep up with how fast the world is changing.
I think so too. So maybe for everyone listening, as you think about your own work, your own approaches to learning and development, it's worth asking, what are those foundational assumptions maybe lurking beneath the surface?
Yeah.
What might happen if you just gently poked at them, questioned them a little? And maybe how could you start to cultivate a bit more of that garden-like learning environment in your own world, one that isn't afraid of uncertainty but actually thrives in it?